Welcome everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution gameplay video. Well, today we're going to be talking about Daytona and how do we set up the car to go fast at Daytona. And I must admit, this is an interesting video for me to do because first and foremost, I'm having pretty much zero fun at Daytona in this game, or Talladega for that matter, for various reasons that we'll get into as this video moves on, but primarily because I'm just having no fun racing against the AI. All right, so let's jump right into the setup itself. Again, you can see that the shocks, as per my setup videos previously, you can see that almost everything is just straight 10s across the board. Again, feel free to mess with these numbers as you wish, but the only things I did change in this particular video, and I'm not sure they actually helped or hurt, but it was just some things I was testing out, and that is in the rear of the car, the bump on the left rear and right rear, I've reduced them to 5. You can actually go a few clicks lower than that if you want, down all the way to 3. But what that does is it allows the car to sit down a little bit more in the corners based on the timing of the shocks. The idea for Daytona and Talladega is to reduce drag as much as possible. Okay, and the way you do that, number one, is to get the car as close to the ground as possible. So get your ride heights as low as you possibly can, particularly in the rear. Now, I can't remember which track it is by default, but one of the two, either Daytona or Talladega, by default has your rear ride height way up in the air. Now, I have absolutely no idea why you would do that, because all it does is slow you down, because it just adds drag. It gets the spoiler up in the air, and there's no good that's going to come from that on a track like Daytona or Talladega. So, on the weight settings, again, left weight, it's an oval, so we're maxing it out. The front weight, it can actually be an advantage to use less than 50% front weight or nose weight, simply because the more weight you put in the rear of the car, the more you can get the rear of the car to squat down, getting that spoiler out of the air and further reducing the drag. In this case, I tried that, and I think I basically hit a brick wall to the point where I know for me, I didn't want to try anymore, because it was getting to the point of just being silly, chasing a few hundredths of a second here and there. So I decided, look, this is this is plenty far enough. So I wasn't seeing a great deal of additional benefit from moving weight to the rear, so I just stuck with a 50-50 split. But as always, feel free to play around with that number and see if maybe going even lower and putting more rear weight in the car will make it faster. Wedge, one of the things that I found out with this car is that once I took all of the drag out of the car that I felt like I could, or that was actually helping my speed, then it becomes about, how do I drive the car in traffic? I need the car to turn so that I can hug the bottom the entire way around the track without sliding up the racetrack in the corners. And one of the things I needed to do was really work with the wedge. I've lowered it to 49%, and that, along with some of the other setup pieces that we'll see in a moment, really helped the car to turn, and it was very comfortable through the corners, even at the highest speeds. Okay, the front and rear height both at their lowest settings, which is pretty standard for me. All right, let's move on to springs. All right, in the case of springs, I started playing around with things, and it didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference, quite frankly, on the front springs. So I ended up putting the max stiffness spring in the left front, again, simply to help the car turn as much as possible, particularly on corner entry and through the center. And one thing I have found with the relationship between the left front spring and the right front spring is having a huge difference. The bigger the difference is between these two springs, the more the car seems to steer or wander a little bit on the straightaways, and the steering feels a little weird to me. So I try to keep those fairly close together. I don't think I've had a situation where I've really wanted to go beyond 200 pounds of difference between these two numbers, just for that very reason. But again, with some of the controller issues that this game has been having, feel free to try out, any number of things on the spring settings and see just how they feel to you. Now the rear springs, this is a case where I wanted to get the rear of the car out of the air as much as possible to reduce drag. So I dropped a 200-pound left rear spring in it, and that worked. And the way you determine if it works or not is it dragging the ground? If it's dragging the ground, then obviously we're going to have to go, raise that number a little bit, or you can always go back to the rear ride height and try raising that a little bit, but I didn't want to do that and risk increasing the drag. So I wanted to use the softest rear springs I could get by with and allow the car to turn, because what I did to begin with is I put 200 pounds in the left rear, 200 pounds in the right rear, and that didn't drag, but boy, did it cause the car to push quite a bit through the corner. And I thought, it's just not worth it that much, because as I kept testing it, the difference between 200 and 250 pound spring really wasn't that noticeable to me on the drag. So I decided to leave the 250 because it helps the car to turn. All right, we'll come back to tire settings in just a second, but first let's go to the miscellaneous settings. And the camber, same thing as previously mentioned in other videos, I maxed out the camber. Now, again, you don't have to, but this game seems to model every increase in camber all the way up to the maximum with an increase in grip. So I really didn't have any reason not to run the max camber. Front sway bar, I basically left alone. You could play around with this, maybe decrease it if you feel like the front end needs a little bit more grip. That would certainly be fine and reasonable. But for me, the car was handling great, and I was getting about all the speed I needed to get out of it, so I didn't worry too much with this. Rear sway bar, if you feel like the car isn't turning quite enough, feel free to increase that number. Again, I didn't really need the car to turn anymore, so I didn't mess with it. Now, track bar, you can see both of these are maxed out. 15 inches is as high as you can get it. And that's because I wanted this car to turn. So what better way to get it to turn than to max out the track bar? That will definitely help the car rotate. Brake bias really isn't a big issue here. Grill tape, you can see from another video I've done, has zero effect that I can find on the car. So I just don't mess with it. Wheel lock and steering offset really aren't an issue regardless. And that brings us to gear settings. This game is a little weird with the gear ratios and where the engine performs best. Generally, if you watch NASCAR on Sundays, you can see that these guys are pushing the RPMs basically as far as they can. Now, NASCAR has brought them back below 9,000 or right at 9,000 in most cases now. But a few years ago, they were running 94, 9,500 or more if they could get by with it. NASCAR has done some things to bring that back down, but that's not the case in this game. You really don't want to get near 9,000 RPMs, particularly on a plate track. So this is the gear setting that I ended up with. Again, feel free to tweak these. You might get a little bit more speed here or there out of this, but I ended up with a 2.8 gear running a fourth gear of 0.9. That gets the RPM, as best I could tell, into a pretty good range. That keeps you around 6,500 to 7,000 RPMs. So, stay in that range, and in general, you're going to be fine. The engine seems to pull pretty good there. All right, now let's go to tires. Now you can see this setting looks kind of weird because all of the tire pressures are maxed out. Now, I certainly didn't anticipate this happening, but it's one of the things based off of some of the previous setup videos that I tried that I wanted to see. Okay, let's test this out. Let's see what effect tire pressure has. And it turns out here it has a huge effect. And with this particular setup using max tire pressures, now one thing it doesn't do, it does not help the car turn. It definitely does not do that. Using this, you basically get rid of all the stagger from the tires in the car. So it does not help the car turn, but that's okay. We've got other things like we've got track bar to do that. We've got camber to do that. We've got wedge to do that. We've got some other things to do that we can do to the car to make the car turn. So that was okay. But as far as all-out speed, I couldn't beat using 50 pounds max air pressure in all of the tires. So you say, okay, what kind of lap times can you expect using this? Well, I was able to run by myself 47.1 to 47.2 lap after lap. And, exactly what lap time I run really depends on how close to the bottom I get in the corners and how much I let the car drift on corner exit, that kind of thing. So depending on how aggressive I got with driving it, I could get down to a 47.1 or so. And then if I just ran more of a leisurely lap and not really worried too much about the line I was running, I could easily get into the 47.2s. So keep that in mind. The bad news for me is that this setup took all the fun out of Daytona for me, because even with the AI, which you see in the background here, running at the max 105% difficulty, I was easily blowing them away on the track. I ran a short race with them, and once I got to the lead, I was outrunning them by 6 or 8 tenths of a second per lap, and it was no fun, so I simply stopped. So now, if you're saying, okay, if I want all the speed I can possibly get out of the car, then I would recommend using a setup like this as your base. However, if you're saying, look, what I really want to do is race with the AI, then I would recommend, first and foremost, reducing these tire pressure settings. Okay, and testing some of the other pressures I use, something like 27 pounds, 26, 27 pounds on the left side, maybe 31 to 33 pounds on the right sides. Try that. Now, that, like I said, that will slow the car down. It will also help the car to turn quite a bit, so you're probably going to want to do some things like lower the track bar, increase the amount of wedge you have, that type of thing. So be prepared for that. Also, you may have to increase the rear springs a little bit, because taking that much air pressure out of the rear tires may make the rear of the car drag. So keep those things in mind. And like I said, if you want to race with the AI, then you're going to need to do some things like that, because if you use the setup just like you see it now on screen, then you're going to run away with it. You're going to easily be several miles per hour faster than them. And like I said, I was anywhere from 6 to 8 tenths per lap faster than the AI. So in that respect, it kind of ruined it, because, at this particular point in time, I have no idea if the draft is actually a real thing in this game, because these cars can't keep up with me for me to find out. So keep that in mind when using this setup, and you may want to adjust some things to fit your driving style and also the speed you actually want the car to turn. So hope you've learned some things. Hopefully this has helped you out. Feel free to leave any comments or suggestions in the comment section below the video, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat Evolution.